I wanted to share something. This is a letter that I wrote Stacie and a letter that she wrote back to me. When we first met, we introduced ourselves to each other as fictional characters. This is my letter. I typewrote it. I scanned both of these and posted them on Facebook without any attention, but it's fairly hard to see in this light. But that's her handwriting in pencil. This was my attempt at showing off my plumage to her, so some of it's embarrassing because I was 18. Title of story here, I said at the top. Once upon a time in a small and unimportant galaxy, a galaxy that is simultaneously very important, the Milky Way galaxy as it is called by a small and simultaneously important and highly unimportant little blue, green, and white planet within it. Actually, it just so happens that this story takes place in that very same little world, in a minute and microscopic space on the surface of it, called by its biped sentient inhabitants Milwaukee, Wisconsin. One of the local inhabitants' names is Joseph Taliesin. Joseph Taliesin was 18 years of age and lived with his parents in a lovely home betwixt the inner city, the ghetto, the slums, a place filled with more pain, misery, and abuse than anywhere, and Washington Heights, a place for the rich to trample over everyone not of Germanic descent or wealthy, knowingly or unknowingly. And there's a quote, there's room at the top there telling you still, but first you must learn how to smile as you kill, John Lennon, working class hero. Joseph was blond with brown eyes. His father was an urban minister, Catholic, but with the wisdom and care of a shaman. He was also a member of the local Socialist Party, not the racist sort, that's National Socialism, and his mother, an artist was a former member of the Christian anarchist activist movement, the Plowshares. She now works for an organization that helps the mentally ill. Their names are Brian Taliesin and Janice Sullis. Janice retained her maiden name as she and Brian refused to have a marriage mandated by the state. Instead, they had a lovely non-legal marriage ceremony in a park beneath the trees amongst friends. Joseph was 4 or 5 at the time, and Penny and Dave Fox, friends of the family, who are folk musicians, sang a lovely set of songs at the service. Amongst the lineup they sang In My Life by John Lennon, a song that was granted the title of greatest song written in the 20th century. Joseph and his family had German, Polish, and Irish ancestry, as well as family from Jamaica, family living in New Zealand, and all over the world. Joseph was a lover of the arts. He listened to everything from classic rock to rap to punk rock and a touch of metal. He was a musician himself, dealing primarily with punk rock and folk music. He helped to found a punk group in his middle school and later developed his style with Dan Menace, the bassist of his later punk group Outcasted Youth. His folk music developed later, around the age of 17, with his friend Joseph Green. He also dabbled in ambient sound and read poetry at open mics around town on occasion. He was also a visual artist, dabbling with sketches, acrylic on canvas, and mixed media primarily. By the age of 17, he had already been commissioned to paint 2 banners for demonstrations, Voces de la Frontera, and 2 Christmas cards, also Voces de la Frontera. Today was Saturday, the day of Saturn, Archangel Zadkiel, a day centered around communication, and he was doing just that. At 7:30 at night, he began his weekly communication with the divine spirit of the universe, God and Goddess, the Lord and Lady. He did this by blessing the room with incense. Hold on. He then began to set up his altar. He brought out his statuette of Ptah and set it opposite the statuette of Mary and Christ, pulled the two votive candle stumps out of their holders and replaced them with fresh ones. Joseph Taliesin took it mostly for granted, but he had a lovely and unique altar. The front table rose roughly 2 feet off the ground and was roughly 3.5 feet wide. In the center of the front table was a depiction of Hurpakrat, god of the dawning of the new age of prosperity in Aquarius, with a bowl of water in front, with a lotus floating in it, an allusion to the ancient Kemetic creation story. Kemetic, the black, fertile land, the land of the blacks. Kapt, Kemet. To the right of this was a Tibetan singing bowl, brass bowl that acts as a divinely tuned bell when a wooden dowel stroked along its rim. To the right of this, statuettes of Mother Mary and baby Jesus, Jehuti or Thoth, Kemetic god of wisdom and knowledge. To the left of Hurpakrat and the bowl of water with the lotus statuettes of Ptah, Kemetic god of creative spirit, Oset or Isis, mistress of magic, and a drilbu, Tibetan bell representing the divine female, composed of 7 different metals associated with the planets, and rings the same note as the singing bowl. Upon the table behind this one sat a 3-foot non-traditional Buddha bearing an image of Ma'at, the divine balancer of karma in the Kemetic faith, and statuettes of the bodhisattvas of love and compassion, Tara and Avalokiteshvara Chenasik, from the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. Other objects included a bit of petrified wood, a large cowrie shell, a buckeye smudge, and a stone with the Indian symbol for the penultimate entirety of the universe, Om. Each statuette had a candle in front or beside it, and the front table of the altar was dressed with an African cloth decorated with his grandfather's pastoral stole, and betwixt this an Egyptian dress stole. And that's when the typewriter conked out, so then I started writing it handwriting. It was covered with a chenu, otherwise cartouche, with his Kemetic name Ankhemet Hemut, meaning life to the earth's poetry, a wish, and an Ankh, the ancient Kemetic symbol of the eternal life of the masculine and feminine aspects of the universe. As the sun began to set, Joseph pulled out his book on Kemetic magic and opened it to the page he bookmarked. He began his ritual by blessing the altar with the elements, sprinkling water in the 4 directions, lighting the incense and calling Shu, the spirit of air, to bless the 4 directions, and then lighting the candles, thanking each god respectively, and then calling attention to spirit in the 4 directions. South Ra, the sun; west Set, mistress of magic; north Osiris, caretaker of the underworld, master of reincarnation, husband of Set; and east Neptet, goddess of the house of eternity. After this blessing, Joseph looked upon the lotus rising out of the bowl and meditated upon the ancient tale of the monad rising from the waters of chaos upon a lotus and ejaculating the universe asexually. Joseph knew that all faiths in the world are simply different pieces of the same spiritual jigsaw puzzle, and that the ancient Kemetic faith was not polytheistic, but rather the gods and goddesses were attributes of the one Creator. Joseph had also come to believe recently that the original Joseph, son of Jacob in the Bible, is actually the ancient Kemetic king Djoser, and that he introduced much of the original Kemetic faith to the peoples, as he had found that the top 9 gods and goddesses, or the Ennead, directly correlated to the 9 top Sephirot aspects of God in the Abrahamic Kabbalic tree of life. And then I put a little example of my developing hypothesis as an 18-year-old, but there's a lot more to it than just that. So this is her response letter, in which she describes, well, I'll just read it, and then what I didn't say in that letter is that night I was doing a prayer to Hathor for love, true love, and in this letter, which I also scanned and posted on Facebook, she mentions that she did a similar form of ritual prayer. My version uses red ribbons, and hers did as well, as she pointed out in this letter. It's a little different than mine, the one that I did, but unbeknownst to Joseph, in a neighboring region of the blue, green, and white planet, another inhabitant had much the same intentions for that night as he himself. Stephanie Tolan thought herself unremarkable at best, being a bit of a self-loathing individual, although everyone seemed to disagree with her self-assessment. She had boyishly short black hair, though one could clearly see the accursed blonde roots coming through, and blue eyes. Being, I always felt the same way. I always dyed my hair black every chance I got. Being 16, she still lived with her parents in a small section of Brookfield, Wisconsin, reserved for the lower middle class, who at this point were slowly descending towards upper-lower class. Stephanie's family life was best described as dysfunctional, though some would say that this was entirely too euphemistic. Will and Suzanne Tolan, both certified public accountants who adhered to every social norm, could not fathom how they produced such an offspring as Stephanie. Even with a strict religious upbringing, the religion being Catholicism, Stephanie was never a good Catholic girl, preferring the sounds of post-punk to her mother's country and gospel, as well as practicing various neo-pagan religions. She found escape from monotony of everyday life in the form of visual artistry. She worked primarily in ebony, her chosen style being realism. Until the age of 19, until the age of, well, she already mentioned that she's 16, so it's rubbed off quite a bit. It's fairly old now, and it's written in pencil. 15. Stephanie kept her art from the eyes of others, at which point her high school art teacher chose to enter one of her pieces in a competition recognizing the talent of young artists. The piece won the highest regional award, yet failed to make it into the national competition. The piece in question now sat above her pathetic excuse for an altar, as it contained a large ankh and several pentacles. It seemed the most appropriate space for it to be displayed. The altar beneath the piece consisted of a small, crudely painted table draped in crushed black velvet. Atop the fabric sat a total of 6 candles, 4 representing the elements: yellow for air, blue for water, red for fire, and green for earth, one in black representing the form of the goddess, Mother Earth in her belief, and the last, a slightly shorter black candle representing the male counterpart to the goddess. Tonight, there sat more than the standard of candles atop the altar. These objects appearing on the altar with increasing frequency consisted of a pink candle and 3 pieces of red ribbon. Betwixt a piece of paper depicting the words love and companionship was braided, and I'm missing a part of this one, but I think it might be in my files. I've moved so many times around this city that I've lost most all of my life in the process, but this is my shrine to her. That's a painting that I made of her and gave to her, that was given back to me by her mother, and some of her canned flowers and other things that I made. But the last portion of her letter to me is here. This letter, there were other letters. Stephanie knelt before the altar, lighting both sage and vanilla incense in preparation to cast a traditional Wiccan circle used for purification. As she felt the negative energies leave her, she broke the seal of pink wax on the ends of the ribbon, gently freeing each ribbon and releasing the spell, or if you prefer prayer, some form of a desperate plea, etc. I love that, but that's my favorite part. I wish I could show you on here. It's very bad light. Wait, Let me do this. Oh well. I scanned this and shared it already. With the spell now being complete, Stephanie thanked each element, god and goddess, and dismissed each in turn. The circle closed with the dismissal of the goddess, and a strong emotion immediately sought out the mind of Stephanie: guilt. This emotion stemmed directly from the unhealthy relationship she was in, and the one she desired. Thus, the casting of a spell intended to bring the user love and companionship greatly stirred said emotion. What happened now was determined by fate. At least this is what Stephanie chose to believe as she fell into the blissful darkness surrounding her, the sounds of the cure easing her into a troubled sleep. Um, I want to say more about that, but I'm just gonna leave it at that for now, and then I'll say more in time.